Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be tackling Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a figure who still sparks debate centuries later.
Oh, absolutely.
We've got a great mix of sources, excerpts from a biography, some historical context,
Right.
and even a few of his own writings. Our mission today is to understand why Rousseau is considered both brilliant and controversial.
Right.
What can we learn from him about politics, society, even ourselves?
It's fascinating, isn't it? He was admired by figures like Kant, the champion of reason, and Robespierre, a leader of the French Revolution. Two seemingly opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Yet both found something in Rousseau.
That's what I find so intriguing. He's described as both a champion of democracy and a potential precursor to totalitarianism.
Yeah.
That's quite a contradiction.
Yeah.
How do we even begin to make sense of that?
That tension, that paradox,
Yeah.
is a key to understanding Rousseau. He didn't shy away from complexity, he embraced it. To really get him, we need to resist the temptation to simplify, to put him in a neat little box.
It's like he's almost daring us to grapple with those contradictions.
Yeah.
And it's not just his ideas. His life story is full of these paradoxes, too.
Exactly.
Championing individual feeling,
Yeah.
but also advocating for strict societal structures, writing passionately about education, but abandoning his own children. It's almost like he's constantly challenging our assumptions about him.
Exactly. And that's what makes him so endlessly fascinating. He reminds us that human beings and the ideas they generate are rarely black and white. There's always nuance, always more than meets the eye.
This makes me think about how we receive information today. Are we too quick to simplify, to categorize,
Yeah.
to dismiss ideas that don't fit neatly into our existing frameworks?
That's a great question, and one that Rousseau's own life forces us to consider. Perhaps, like him, we should be more willing to embrace the complexity, to delve deeper into the nuances before forming our judgments.
Okay, so let's dive into one of those nuances.
Yeah.
Rousseau's relationship with the Enlightenment. When we think of that era, we often think logic, the scientific method. But Rousseau was all about feeling.
You've hit on a crucial point. Rousseau is often seen as pushing back against that. Enlightenment equals pure reason. Stereotype. He argued that feeling, emotion, is fundamental to our existence. It's not just some secondary aspect of being human. It actually comes before thought. It shapes how we perceive and interact with the world.
I'm struck by that idea. I feel, therefore I am, he might have said, flipping Descartes on his head. In today's world, where we're bombarded with information and opinions, is Rousseau suggesting we need to get back in touch with our gut instincts, even when they go against logic?
It's not necessarily about rejecting logic, but rather understanding its limitations. Our feelings influence how we process information, how we make sense of the world around us. Rousseau reminds us that we can't simply separate ourselves from that emotional reality.
It's interesting that you mention how we process information, because it's not just in his philosophy. His writing style itself reflects this emphasis on feeling.
Absolutely. He's not just trying to convey facts. He's trying to evoke feelings in the reader. There's a fantastic anecdote about this. Kant, known for his rigorous logic, had to actually force himself to reread Rousseau calmly because the emotional impact was so powerful that speaks volumes about Rousseau's ability to connect on a visceral level.
This brings us to perhaps his most famous line. Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. Wow, just reading that sends chills down my spine. But what does it actually mean?
That quote gets right to the heart of Rousseau's political philosophy. It highlights this inherent tension he saw between our natural state and the constraints of society. He believed humans are innately good, born with a natural freedom. But society, with all its rules and structures, corrupts us, trapping us in these metaphorical chains.
What kind of chains do you think he was referring to? So are we talking literal chains?
Right.
Like laws and governments? Or is it something more subtle, like societal expectations and the roles we're pressured to play?
It's both. He's questioning the very nature of power and how it's used to control individuals. To explore this, he uses the concept of the state of nature. It's crucial to remember that this is a thought experiment, not a literal historical claim.
So he's not suggesting humans actually lived in some idyllic paradise.
Exactly. Before civilization, the state of nature is a tool to understand what's truly natural in us versus what's imposed by society. It allows us to critique existing systems, to see where we may have gone wrong.
I'm starting to see why he's still relevant today. It's easy to accept the way things are, but Rousseau is pushing us to question those assumptions, to imagine alternative possibilities, and perhaps even recognize the chains that limit our own freedom.
That's one of his most enduring legacies. He gives us the tools to challenge the status quo, to envision a world where we're not bound by these often invisible chains.
Let's get into specifics. The source material highlights his concern. With private property, he saw it as the root of societal ills. But he wasn't exactly advocating for communism, was he?
No, he wasn't calling for the abolition of all property. His concern was with excessive wealth, the kind that breeds inequality and injustice.
Wow. It's remarkable how some of his ideas resonate centuries later. Income inequality is a huge issue right now, with calls for wealth taxes and more equitable distribution of resources. It's like we're still grappling with the same questions.
It's uncanny, isn't it? Rousseau raised back in the 1700s. He advocated for taxing luxury, promoting local economies, and valuing work over inherited wealth. These ideas might sound radical, yet we see echoes of them in today's world.
The source material even points to some modern-day examples. Vermont's sustainable secession movement, the rise of local currencies, even elements of the sharing economy. These ideas, once considered fringe, are gaining traction in certain circles.
It really shows that Rousseau's critique of inequality wasn't just some abstract philosophical exercise. It stemmed from a deep concern for the well-being of society and a conviction that things could be structured more fairly.
And this brings us to his concept of the general will, perhaps his most ambitious idea, about balancing individual desires with the needs of the community. But it also seems incredibly complex, even slippery. How do we even determine what the general will is?
That is the million-dollar question, and one that Rousseau himself grappled with. It's not simply about majority rule or imposing the will of the powerful. It's about individuals freely choosing what's best for the community as a whole. But how do we arrive at that collective understanding when people have such diverse needs and desires?
It feels like we're constantly wrestling with this tension between individual freedom and collective responsibility,
right.
Is Rousseau suggesting that we need to somehow transcend our own self-interest and think about what's best for everyone.
That's the core challenge he presents. And you're right, it feels especially daunting in today's world, where political polarization and social divisions seem to be widening. But maybe that's precisely why. Rousseau's ideas are so relevant, he forces us to confront these difficult questions about how we create a just and harmonious society, even amidst disagreement.
So how do we even begin to reconcile those differences? Is he suggesting some sort of compromise?
Yeah.
Or is there a deeper level of agreement we need to strive for?
Rousseau believed it was possible to achieve a genuine consensus, but he acknowledged it would be incredibly difficult. He saw the general will, not as a fixed outcome, but as an ongoing process of deliberation, debate, and collective decision-making.
This makes me think about the role of dialogue and civic engagement. In a healthy democracy. Is that what Rousseau was getting at? That we need to actively participate in shaping the general will, rather than simply expecting it to magically appear.
That's a really insightful connection. He believed that individuals had a responsibility to participate in the political process, to engage in reasoned debate, and to strive towards a common understanding of the common good. He wasn't advocating for blind obedience or a suppression of dissenting voices. Rather, he saw dissent and debate as crucial elements in the formation of a truly just and representative society.
Okay, so we've talked about Rousseau's big ideas, his paradoxes, his focus on feeling. But I'm curious about his actual impact on the world. Did his writing really change anything?
His work was incredibly influential, particularly his books, The Social Contract and Emile. It's ironic that both were condemned to be burned, yet they ended up circulating widely and profoundly impacting political and social thought.
I can see how revolutionaries would have been drawn to his ideas, especially his notions of popular sovereignty, the right to overthrow unjust governments and empower the people. It's like he provided a philosophical framework for those seeking to challenge the existing power structures.
Precisely. His ideas helped fuel revolutionary movements, not just in France, but around the world. And beyond immediate political upheaval, his emphasis on individual rights and civic participation deeply shaped the development of modern democratic ideals.
It's fascinating how those ideas, which might have seemed radical in his times, have become foundational principles for many modern societies. But his impact wasn't limited to politics.
Right.
You mentioned Emile, which focuses on education. What was so groundbreaking about his approach?
Emile was a radical departure from traditional educational philosophies. At the time, education was largely about rote memorization, strict discipline, and unquestioning obedience to authority. But Rousseau saw this as stifling a child's natural curiosity.
And creativity.
Instead of molding children into obedient subjects, he wanted to cultivate citizens capable of critical thinking and independent judgment. That's quite a different vision. For education, he advocated for a more experiential approach, encouraging children to learn. Through direct engagement with the world around them, he believed in nurturing their natural curiosity, encouraging them to ask questions, and fostering their ability to think for themselves. In many ways, he was a pioneer of what we now call hands-on learning, or experiential education.
That's remarkable. Considering the prevailing educational norms of his time, he was truly ahead of his time in recognizing the importance of fostering critical thinking skills, especially in young minds.
And it's more relevant than ever today, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely.
We live in an age of information overload, where it's incredibly challenging to sift through the noise and discern truth from falsehood. It feels like we're all in desperate need of those critical thinking skills Rousseau championed centuries ago.
I see a powerful connection here to our earlier discussion about Rousseau's emphasis on feeling, if he was concerned about the potentially corrupting influence of society back in the 1700s. What would he make of our hyper-connected world today, with the constant bombardment of media, the echo chambers of social media, and the spread of misinformation? It's almost like his worst fears have been amplified 1,000-fold.
It raises a crucial question. Who will be our mentors in this complex digital landscape? Who will teach us to navigate this information overload, to discern truth from falsehood, to resist manipulation? These are challenges that Rousseau's legacy compels us to confront.
It makes you wonder if we're all like Emile in a way, needing guidance to navigate this complex and often overwhelming world. Perhaps we need to rediscover those core principles Rousseau championed: critical thinking,
Independent judgment,
and a deep connection to our own inner compass.
and perhaps we also need to re-examine our relationship with technology, with social media, and with the constant influx of information. That shapes our perceptions and understanding of the world. Rousseau might urge us to cultivate a more discerning and critical approach to the information we consume, to question assumptions, and to engage in thoughtful dialogue rather than simply accepting what we see and hear at face value.
This makes me think about the concept of media literacy, which is so crucial in today's world. Are we equipping young people with the tools they need to navigate this complex media landscape, to critically evaluate the information they encounter, and to form their own informed opinions?
That's a vital question, and one that connects directly to Rousseau's vision of education. He wasn't just concerned with imparting knowledge, he was deeply invested in cultivating citizens who could think for themselves, engage in reasoned debate, and contribute to the betterment of society.
It sounds like he was calling for a much more active and engaged form of citizenship, one that goes beyond simply voting or following the rules. He was urging us to be active participants.
Exactly, in shaping the world around us. And that requires not only critical thinking skills, but also a deep sense of empathy, a willingness to understand perspectives different from our own, and a commitment to working together to address the challenges we face collectively.
So to bring this back to Rousseau's concept of the general will, are you suggesting that finding common ground and working towards collective solutions requires more than just rational debate? Are you saying we need to tap into our emotions, our shared humanity, to truly bridge those divides?
That's a profound insight. Rousseau recognized that reason alone is insufficient to guide human action. We are emotional beings, and our emotions play a powerful role in shaping our beliefs, values, and motivations.
This makes me think back to his emphasis on feeling as a fundamental aspect of the human experience. It's almost like he anticipated the limitations of a purely rational approach to solving complex social and political challenges.
He understood that true progress requires not only intellectual rigor, but also emotional intelligence, a recognition of our shared humanity, and a willingness to connect with others on a deeper level.
So how do we cultivate those qualities in ourselves and in society as a whole? How do we create spaces for genuine dialogue, empathy, and understanding, especially in a world that often feels so polarized and divided?
That's a complex question, and one that I don't think has any easy answers. But I believe that Rousseau's work offers some valuable insights. He reminds us of the importance of education, not just in the traditional sense, but in a broader sense, of cultivating critical thinking, fostering empathy, and nurturing a sense of shared responsibility for the well-being of our communities.
It sounds like he was advocating for a kind of education that goes beyond the classroom, one that permeates all aspects of our lives and shapes how we interact with each other and the world around us.
Exactly. He believed that true education is a lifelong endeavor, a continuous process of learning, growing, and engaging with the world in a thoughtful and compassionate way. And in today's world, that kind of education feels more essential than ever.
It feels like we've come full circle. Back to Rousseau's idea. That feeling is fundamental to the human experience. And yet, I can't help but wonder if in today's hyper-connected world, we've somehow lost touch with those authentic feelings. Is it possible
Good question.
that all this technology, all this social media, has actually made us less connected to ourselves and to each other?
That's a provocative question, and one that I think Rousseau himself would have found fascinating. We're surrounded by expressions of emotion, but are they genuine? Or are we simply performing our emotions for an invisible audience, constantly seeking validation through likes and shares?
It's almost as if his affective turn has taken an unexpected twist.
Yeah.
We're awash in emotion.
Yeah.
Yet there's this underlying sense of emptiness, a yearning for something more authentic, more real.
And perhaps in that pursuit of external validation, we've lost touch with the inner self that Rousseau saw as the source of true freedom and happiness. It's as if we've traded those metaphorical chains he talked about for digital ones. We think we're expressing our individuality. Are we really? Or are we simply conforming to the algorithms, the trends, the expectations of this online world?
This makes me think about those invisible chains you mentioned earlier. Maybe those digital chains are even more insidious because they're often invisible, even to ourselves.
It's a subtle form of control, one that operates beneath the surface of our awareness. We think we're making free choices, but are those choices truly our own? Or are they being shaped, manipulated even, by forces outside our control?
Okay, this is getting a bit heavy. Is there anything positive we can take away
Yeah.
from Rousseau's insights on feeling in our hyper-connected world?
I think there is, remember. While Rousseau was wary of how society could corrupt our natural feelings, he also believed in the power of empathy, of connecting with others on a deep, emotional level. And despite all its flaws, social media can facilitate that kind of connection.
I can see that. I've definitely seen examples of people using social media to build communities, to support each other, to raise awareness about important issues. It's like a double-edged sword, isn't it? It has the potential to both isolate and connect us.
Exactly. The key is to be mindful, to use these tools in a way that promotes genuine connection rather than just superficial engagement. Perhaps Rousseau would encourage us to be more intentional about how we cultivate those authentic relationships that give our lives meaning and purpose.
Almost like we need to find a way to balance our online and offline lives, to nurture those real-world connections that ground us and nourish our souls.
And perhaps in doing so, we can tap into that deeper sense of belonging and shared humanity that Rousseau believed was essential for a just and flourishing society.
Wow, that's a really powerful thought. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the complex and often contradictory world of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, what's the one key takeaway you'd like to leave our listener with?
I think it's this. Rousseau's work is not just a historical artifact. It's a living testament to the enduring power of ideas. His ideas continue to challenge us, to provoke us, and to inspire us to think differently about ourselves and the world we inhabit. He may not have provided all the answers, but he certainly asked the right question.
And in a world that often feels defined by easy answers and quick fixes, those questions, those enduring challenges are more important than ever. So to our listener out there, I encourage you to explore Rousseau's work for yourself. Don't be afraid to wrestle with his ideas, to embrace the complexity, and to discover what insights you can glean for your own life and for the world around you.
He might even challenge you to rediscover the power of feeling, to connect more authentically with yourself and others, and to dare to envision a world where freedom and justice prevail.
Well said. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the endlessly fascinating world of Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our listener, until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep